Sir, cooperate now, or this flight is not leaving.
You should check who triggered that security alert.
Ground hold confirmed. Multiple departures affected.
Part 1. The security officer stopped him 3 steps before the jet bridge. "Sir, I need you to step aside." Marcus Whitfield looked at the boarding pass in his hand, then at the uniformed man standing between him and Gate 42. Around them, the morning rush at Calder International Airport moved in waves. Rolling suitcases clicked over the tile. A coffee machine hissed behind the nearby kiosk. A boarding announcement for another flight crackled through the speakers and disappeared into the noise. "I've already cleared screening," Marcus said. "My flight board's in 15 minutes. The officer glanced at the tablet he was holding. "Hey, just step over here." There was a difference between being asked a question and being treated like an answer had already been decided. Marcus knew that difference. He was 48 years old, a black man with silver beginning at his temples, wearing a navy jacket over a simple gray sweater. Nothing about him announced his position. No assistant followed him. No security team surrounded him. He carried one leather bag with a worn handle and a small notebook where he still wrote ideas by hand. To most people walking past, he looked like another business traveler trying to make a morning flight. They did not see the name engraved on the executive badge inside his bag. They did not see the quarterly reports with his signature. They did not know Marcus Whitfield was the founder and CEO of Meridian Aeronautics Systems, the company whose navigation software operated across hundreds of commercial aircraft worldwide, and he preferred it that way. "Can you tell me what the issue is?" Marcus asked. Officer Daniel Voss lowered his voice. "We received a concern about you." Marcus waited. "What concern?" Daniel's eyes moved briefly toward Marcus' bag. "That's what we're trying to determine." The sentence stayed with Marcus longer than it should have. Trying to determine. Not confirming. Not verifying. Not asking. Determining. A woman standing near the boarding lane looked over. She was holding a toddler's hand and watching the exchange with the uncomfortable expression of someone who wanted to help but did not know how. Marcus noticed her. He noticed everyone. That had always been his problem. He saw details other people ignored. A scratched badge scanner. A nervous employee avoiding eye contact. A passenger being waved through while another was pulled aside for the same thing. Years earlier, before Meridian became a global company, Marcus had worked overnight maintenance shifts at a small aviation supplier outside Detroit. He had learned aircraft systems by listening to the people who repaired them, not just the people who designed them. He also learned what it felt like when people decided what kind of person you were before hearing your name. "Officer," Marcus said calmly, "if there is a specific safety concern, I'm happy to cooperate. But I'd like to know the reason for the additional screening." Daniel's expression tightened. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." That was when Marcus understood the real problem. The problem was not the extra check. The problem was that asking for an explanation had become the complication. A gate agent approached, carrying a handheld scanner. "Everything okay?" Daniel answered before Marcus could. "We're handling a possible security concern." Possible. The word landed differently than the rest. A few passengers slowed down. Marcus felt the familiar pressure of becoming a scene instead of a person. He could end it quickly. He could show his identification. He could make one phone call. He knew people at the airline. He knew regulators. He knew executives who would answer immediately. But he also knew something else. If he used his position every time someone questioned him, nobody would ever learn what happened when he was not there. So he kept his voice steady. "I'm willing to cooperate," Marcus said. "I'm not willing to be treated as suspicious without a reason." Daniel looked toward the gate agent. "She's going to need to hold his boarding." The agent hesitated. "On what basis?" For the first time, Daniel did not have an immediate answer. Then his tablet made a sound. A notification appeared. His face changed slightly, not fear, recognition. Iris noticed. The officer looked back at him. "Mr. Whitfield?" Marcus said nothing. "How do you know my name?" Daniel stared at the screen again. The question was no longer about a passenger in a boarding lane. It was about a file, a system entry, and a decision someone had already made before Marcus ever reached the gate. And somewhere inside Calder International's operations center, a routine flight was about to become the first delay of the morning. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff. Then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold. Part 2. The notification on Daniel Voss's tablet was not a warning, it was a classification. Marcus could not see the entire screen, but he saw enough to notice the officer's posture change. A few seconds earlier, Daniel had been speaking to him like a problem waiting to be contained. Now he looked like someone who had discovered a missing piece of information. "Mr. Whitfield," Daniel said, "I need you to remain here while we complete additional verification." Marcus looked toward the gate. Passengers were beginning to line up. A family with matching backpacks stood near the boarding sign. A man in a business suit checked his watch 3 times in less than a minute. "My flight leaves in 15 minutes, Marcus said. "I understand." "No, I don't think you do." Marcus kept his voice controlled. "Jim, you stopped me before boarding. You told the gate agent there was a security concern. Now, you're telling me there is a verification process. Those are different things." Daniel did not answer immediately. Gate agent Elena Ruiz looked uncomfortable. She had worked at Calder International for 6 years and knew the difference between a normal secondary check and a situation that was becoming something else. "Officer Voss, she said. "What exactly do we need to document?" Daniel glanced at her. "That information is restricted." Ina lowered the scanner in her hand. "Then I need a supervisor." The request changed the rhythm of the moment. Daniel was no longer the only person controlling what happened next. Marcus noticed Elena's choice. The small decisions mattered. People often imagined courage as something dramatic, but sometimes it was a gate agent refusing to stamp a situation as normal when it clearly was not. A supervisor arrived 3 minutes later. His name was Robert Hale. He wore a dark airport operations jacket and carried the tired expression of someone who had spent years solving problems before they became visible. "Do we have?" Robert asked. Daniel handed him the tablet. "Passenger flagged during pre-boarding review." Robert studied the screen. "By whom?" Daniel hesitated. "Automated risk system." Marcus looked between them. "What risk system?" Either man answered. That silence told Marcus more than a direct response would have. The system had made a decision. The humans were now trying to explain it. Robert stepped slightly away and spoke quietly with Daniel. Marcus could not hear every word, but he caught pieces. "Patter, possible match. Not yet." "Then why is he being held?" The question was simple. The answer was not. Marcus watched passengers move around them. Nobody knew that a decision being made at Gate 42 was already affecting more than one person. He saw a delayed boarding lane. They did not see the chain of assumptions behind it. His phone vibrated. A message from his chief operating officer appeared. "Are you at Calder?" "Something strange is happening." Marcus looked up. That was unusual. Meridian's internal travel system automatically monitored executive movements only for scheduling purposes. It did not trigger airport alerts. He typed back. "What happened?" The response came almost immediately. "Our flight operations team received a notice that a security review may affect several aircraft using Meridian navigation software." Marcus frowned. "Several aircraft?" The issue had moved beyond him. He looked again at Daniel's tablet. "Officer," Marcus said, "is my company involved in this review?" Daniel looked surprised. "And how would you know that?" Because Marcus knew systems. He knew when a small signal became a network event. He knew when someone was looking at one person but accidentally pulling an entire structure into the conversation. Robert stepped forward. "Mr. Whitfield, are you saying you have information we need?" Marcus considered the question. This was the moment when he could reveal everything. He could say his name, his title, his authority, but he remembered something his first engineering manager told him years ago. A system that only works when the right person walks into the room is not a strong system. So Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out the leather notebook. "I'm saying," he replied, "that before anyone decides I am a threat, someone should verify what triggered this." Robert looked at the notebook, then at Marcus. Daniel's tablet received another alert. This time, the message was visible from where Marcus stood. "Operational review initiated. Still, multiple flights pending confirmation." The gate agent read it over Daniel's shoulder. "How many flights?" Nobody answered. Then the airport operations desk called Robert's radio. His expression changed as he listened. When he lowered it, he looked toward the departure board. "Hold all Meridian-equipped departures until further notice." The words were quiet. The consequences were not. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff, then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold. Part 3. The first thing Marcus noticed was not the delay. It was the number, 200. Robert Hale repeated it into his radio while standing near Gate 42. Confirm that count. A voice answered through static. 200 affected departures currently identified. Operations is coordinating holds. The passengers nearby reacted immediately. Some looked at the departure board. Others pulled out phones and opened airline apps, searching for explanations that had not arrived yet. Marcus watched the board above the gate. One by one, small changes appeared beside flight numbers. Delayed, pending review, waiting operational clearance. The airport had transformed from a place of movement into a place of waiting. But Marcus was still standing behind the same invisible line that had been drawn around him 15 minutes earlier. A person had made a decision about him. Now an entire system was reacting. Mr. Whitfield, Robert said, turning back, I need to ask you something directly. Marcus nodded. Did you have any reason to believe there was a problem with Meridian systems today? No. Any maintenance changes? Emergency updates? Unauthorized access? No. Robert studied his face. Marcus noticed something familiar in that expression. Not suspicion anymore. Calculation. People often treated authority like a permanent possession. Marcus had spent his career learning that authority was temporary. It belonged to whoever had the right information at the right moment, and right now, nobody had enough information. Then why are your aircraft systems connected to this? Robert asked. Marcus looked at the operations screen in Daniel's hand. Don't think they are. Daniel looked confused. But the alert says Meridian equipment. It says Meridian in the alert, Marcus corrected. That does not mean Meridian caused the alert. The distinction was important. A name appearing in a report was not the same as responsibility. Marcus opened his notebook. Several pages contained handwritten diagrams from a presentation he had prepared for a safety conference the following month. Near the back was a simple sketch of a data flow between aircraft software, airline operations, and maintenance systems. Our system is looking at a vendor identifier, Marcus said. Not a failure source. Robert leaned closer. How do you know? Because if the software had failed, you would not be holding flights. You would be grounding a specific system version. Daniel looked at him. You're saying the alert may have misunderstood the data? I'm saying we don't know yet. That answer surprised them. Marcus could have been certain. He could have used his knowledge as a weapon. Instead, he left room for what he did not know. That was something his engineers respected about him. He never confused experience with proof. A few minutes later, another employee approached. Her name was Tessa Grant, a flight operations analyst who had been monitoring the growing delay from the control center. I need to speak with Mr. Hale. Robert stepped aside. Tessa lowered her voice. The system generated the hold after a passenger security event. Marcus heard the sentence. A passenger security event, not a software event. Not an aircraft issue. A passenger. His stomach tightened slightly. The original decision had started with him. Now the consequences had spread through a system that had never been designed to question its own assumptions. It triggered the passenger event, Marcus asked. Tessa looked uncertain. I don't have clearance to discuss that. Do you have access to the record? She hesitated. Yes, then check the timestamp. Tessa frowned. Why? Because I want to know whether the system reacted before or after someone decided I was a threat. Nobody answered. Tessa opened the record. The screen reflected in her glasses as she scrolled. Then she stopped. She found something. Robert stepped closer. What? Tessa looked at Marcus. The alert was created before your boarding pass was scanned. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle into place. The system had not discovered something about him. It had been searching for confirmation of something it already believed. And now 200 flights were waiting, because nobody had stopped to ask the simplest question first. Who decided the assumption was true? Security threatened a black CEO before Takeoff, then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold. Part 4. For several seconds, nobody moved. The airport continued around them. A child laughed near a charging station. A suitcase wheel caught briefly on a cracked tile. A coffee cup slipped from someone's hand and was caught before it hit the floor. Small things, normal things, the kind of things that usually disappeared when a bigger problem entered the room. But Marcus Whitfield had spent enough years inside complex systems to know that disasters rarely began with dramatic moments. They began when a small decision traveled farther than anyone expected. Please show me the original event log, Robert Hale said. Tessa looked at him. I can request it. No, Marcus said quietly. Don't request anything yet. Everyone looked at him. Marcus closed his notebook. If the record is already being handled by the same people who created the assumption, we need to preserve it before more people touch it. Robert studied him. You're asking us to treat this as an investigation. Bill, I'm asking you to treat it as a system failure until you know otherwise. Daniel Voss shifted his weight. You're saying the security process failed because you were selected? Marcus looked at him. No. Answer surprised Daniel. I'm saying we don't know why I was selected. That matters. Marcus looked toward the departure board. 200 flights. 200 crews waiting for instructions. Thousands of passengers making new plans. All because one person had been pulled aside and a machine had been allowed to build a story around him. But Marcus knew something else. If he turned this into a personal argument, people would focus on whether he was offended. If he turned it into a process problem, they would have to examine what happened. The distinction had followed him his entire career. At 29, Marcus had been the youngest engineer on a failed aircraft component redesign project. A senior manager blamed the junior team before reviewing the testing data. Marcus had wanted to argue. His mentor, Evelyn Carter, had stopped him. Don't fight the accusation first, she had told him. Find the mechanism that allowed it. At the time, he thought she was teaching him patience. Years later, he realized she was teaching him survival. Tessa opened another screen. I found something else. Robert looked over. What? The system that generated the passenger alert is connected to the airport's behavioral screening model. He frowned. Behavioral? Tessa nodded. It analyzes multiple factors. Daniel crossed his arms. Which is standard. Marcus looked at him. Standard does not mean accurate. Nobody responded. Tessa continued. Its system marked a possible match because of 3 inputs. What inputs? Robert asked. She hesitated. I need to verify before saying. Verify, Marcus said. That mattered. Not because he doubted her. Because he knew how easily a person could become evidence in their own case. A few minutes later, Tessa turned the screen around. With a travel pattern anomaly, manual review request, and a name similarity. Marcus read the information. His expression did not change. Something inside him tightened. The first 2 were vague. The third was dangerous. A name similarity meant someone, somewhere, had decided that 2 people with similar names deserved similar suspicion. What name? Pierce asked. Tessa looked uncomfortable. Marcus Whitaker. The difference was 1 letter. Marcus Whitfield. Pierce Whitaker. A man he had never met. A man whose records had triggered a system designed to find connections, except the system had not found a connection. It had found a resemblance. Bill looked down. So this was a false match, possibly, Marcus said. Again, that answer, possibly. Daniel looked frustrated. You're the person who was stopped and you're still saying possibly. Marcus looked at him. Because if we replace one bad assumption with another, we have learned nothing. That sentence stayed with Robert. Because the problem was becoming clearer. This was not only about a black CEO being mistaken for someone else. It was about how a system decided who deserved extra suspicion, how employees interpreted those alerts, and how quickly an assumption became an operational decision. Then Robert's radio activated. A new message came through. Operations had found the source of the wider disruption. The hold on 200 flights was not caused by a confirmed software issue. It was caused by a security escalation protocol. A protocol triggered by a passenger review. A passenger review triggered by a mistaken identity match. And suddenly, the question was no longer whether Marcus Whitfield was a threat. The question was why a system built to protect people had been allowed to create one. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff. Then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold. Part 5. The airport did not apologize, not yet. Marcus Whitfield had learned that organizations rarely admitted mistakes while they were still trying to understand the size of them. First came containment, then internal conversations, then carefully chosen words designed to avoid creating a second problem. The first public announcement from Calder International appeared 20 minutes after the flight holds began. Due to a precautionary operational review, several departures may experience delays, and passenger safety remains our highest priority. Marcus read the statement from his phone while standing beside Gate 42. Precautionary, operational review, passenger safety. And every word was technically true. Together, they avoided the one sentence people actually needed. A passenger was flagged because a system confused him with someone else. Marcus put the phone away. Who approved the public statement? He asked. Robert Hale looked uncomfortable. Communications. Based on whose information? Robert did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. The same pattern was appearing again. A decision was being made before the facts were fully assembled. Across the terminal, passengers were growing restless. A mother was trying to explain the delay to her children. A pilot stood near the gate desk, waiting for instructions from operations. Airline employees moved faster, but nobody seemed to know where the finish line was. The hold had become bigger than the original mistake, and that was exactly how systems protected themselves. The first error disappeared inside the second one. Tessa Grant approached with a folder. I pulled the review history. Robert looked at her. You were authorized? Yes. Who? She glanced at Marcus. By me. Marcus noticed the choice. Tessa had crossed a line inside her workplace. Not a policy line, a personal one. She had decided that understanding what happened mattered more than staying invisible. What did you find? Marcus asked. Tessa opened the folder. The behavioral screening model did not independently flag you. Marcus looked at her. Explain. The system generates risk scores. It does not stop passengers. A human reviewer has to interpret the score and make a decision. Daniel Voss stood nearby. I followed procedure. Marcus turned toward him. Which procedure? Daniel frowned. Secondary review. No, the part after that. Daniel hesitated. Marcus continued. The part where someone decides the review means a person is dangerous. Nobody spoke, because that was the missing step. The software had not ordered Daniel to stop Marcus. A person had translated uncertainty into suspicion. Tessa pointed to the report. There's something else. She turned the page. Manual review note was added 7 minutes before you reached the gate. Marcus looked at the timestamp. Who added it? Tessa paused. I'm still confirming. Hubert stepped closer. Why does that matter? Because the note was not generated from the system, Marcus said. He looked at the page. It was written by someone. The distinction changed everything. A mistaken algorithm could be a technical failure. A person adding information to influence the outcome was something else. Daniel's face changed. You think someone targeted you? Marcus looked at him. I think someone made a decision before collecting enough information. That was different. And more difficult to dismiss. A few minutes later, Tessa received another message. The expression shifted. What is it? Robert asked. She looked at Marcus. The manual review request came from a priority channel. Channel, she swallowed. Executive travel protection. Marcus went still. That channel was not for ordinary passengers. It was designed for high-level corporate travel coordination, government officials, and sensitive operational movements. Someone had used a powerful internal pathway. But why? Marcus had never requested protection. He had never told the airline he was traveling. His ticket was booked through a standard corporate account. Then Tessa opened the final line of the record. The request had been submitted by someone inside Meridian Aeronautics. Marcus stared at the name. He knew it. Everyone at Meridian knew it. The person who submitted the concern was not an airport employee. Not a security officer. Not a stranger. It was someone from his own company. And suddenly, the question changed again. This was no longer only about why airport security stopped Marcus Whitfield. It was about who inside his own organization wanted him stopped before he ever reached the aircraft. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff. Then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold. Part 6. Marcus Whitfield read the name again. He had expected anger. Instead, what arrived first was disappointment. That surprised him. The person listed on the request was Nathan Cole, Meridian Aeronautics Vice President of Corporate Operations. Nathan had worked beside Marcus for 7 years. He was not a stranger. He was not someone trying to climb over him. He was someone Marcus had trusted. Robert Hale noticed the change in his expression. You know this person? Marcus closed the folder. Yes. Who is he? The person who manages our operational coordination. Daniel Voss looked between them. So someone from your company requested the review? It appears to be the case, Daniel exhaled. Then maybe the airport wasn't the problem. Marcus looked at him. No. The answer was immediate. Maybe the airport became the place where the problem became visible. That distinction mattered, because the easiest explanation was usually the most comfortable one. The airport had stopped him. The security officer had questioned him. The system had flagged him. But systems did not exist alone. They were built, fed, and directed by people. Marcus asked Tessa for the original request. She hesitated. I don't know if I can release that. Why? Because it contains internal corporate information. Marcus nodded slowly. It was reasonable. And that was exactly why he did not want to break the rules, simply because it benefited him. Then preserve it, he said. Tessa looked up. Preserve it? Yes. Lock the current version. Make sure nobody edits it while people are trying to understand what happened. Robert nodded. That's a reasonable request. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Are we treating this as an investigation now? Robert answered before Marcus could. We are treating it as an incident review. The wording was careful. Not accusation, not conclusion. A process. Marcus appreciated that. But he also knew processes could be used honestly or as a place where uncomfortable facts went to disappear. His phone rang. It was his chief operating officer, Lena Brooks. Marcus stepped away from the gate. Lena, Marcus, where are you? Still at Calder. I know, that's not what I mean. Her voice was different, not the calm voice she used during investor meetings. Not the efficient voice she used during operations calls. This was concern. What happened? Marcus asked. There was an emergency access request submitted through Meridian's internal systems. Ethan. A pause. You know already. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. What did he request? It's the problem. I don't know. You're the COO. Oh, I know. The frustration in her voice was not directed at him. It was directed at the situation. Nathan's access was elevated overnight, Lena continued. Someone approved temporary authority to initiate operational reviews. Who approved it? I'm checking. Marcus looked through the terminal windows toward the aircraft waiting on the runway. Aviation had always fascinated him because of one simple truth. Thousands of parts had to cooperate perfectly. A single incorrect signal could force everything to stop. But the answer was never to blame the entire machine. It defined where the signal changed. Lena, Marcus said, do not confront Nathan yet. Marcus, not because I trust him. A pause. Because if he knows we're looking, we lose the timeline. Lena became quiet. You think this was planned? I think someone moved information through a system that trusted them. The words felt heavier when he said them. Not because they were dramatic, because they were possible. When Marcus returned to the gate, Robert was speaking with airport security leadership. Daniel stood apart, staring at the floor. Marcus approached him. You were following procedure. Daniel looked up. That doesn't sound like something someone says when they think I did the right thing. Marcus considered his response. I think you followed the part of the procedure that was easiest to follow. Daniel looked away. And ignored the part where I was supposed to question the assumption? Marcus did not answer. He did not need to. A new message appeared on Tessa's laptop. She read it twice. Then she turned the screen around. The hold, affecting 200 flights, had just been expanded. Not because of a confirmed threat, because someone had triggered a company-wide emergency review. And the person who authorized it had done so using Marcus Whitfield's own executive credentials. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff. Then, 200 flights were suddenly put on hold Part 7. Marcus Whitfield had spent his career learning how to separate a failure from a mystery. Failures had causes. Mysteries had missing information. And right now, too many people were trying to solve the wrong problem. The airport wanted to know whether there was a security threat. Meridian wanted to know whether its systems had been compromised. Passengers wanted to know when they could leave. But Marcus was looking at the question underneath all of them. Who had the ability to make a decision using his credentials without him knowing? Hubert Hale arranged a temporary conference room near airport operations. It was not impressive. A narrow table, 2 monitors, a wall clock that ran 3 minutes fast. Marcus noticed the clock. Old habits, small inconsistencies mattered. Inside the room were Robert, Tessa Grant, Daniel Voss, Lena Brooks on a secure video call, and 2 members of Calder's internal compliance team. Nobody sat at the head of the table. It was intentional. Marcus had learned that the shape of a room often revealed who people expected to matter. Let's establish what we know, Robert said. He pointed to the screen. First, Mr. Whitfield was flagged during a secondary review. Second, Tessa added, the review was initiated through an executive travel protection channel. Third, Robert continued, the request used Meridian credentials. Lena spoke through the screen. Fourth, those credentials were not accessed through Marcus's normal login pattern. The room became quieter. Daniel looked up. So someone used his access? Possibly, Lena said. Marcus noticed she used the same word he had used earlier. Possibly. It was the correct word. Not because they lacked courage. Because facts had rules. Can we determine who entered the request? Robert asked. Tessa nodded. We can trace the access path. Do it. She began typing. The room waited. Marcus did not watch the screen. He watched the people. Hubert was focused. Daniel looked uncomfortable, not defensive, uncertain. That mattered. Ethan Cole had made a choice that morning, but the people around Marcus were making choices too. Some were protecting themselves. Some were protecting the truth. Some were still deciding which one mattered more. The results appeared. Tessa stopped typing. I found the access record. Robert leaned forward. Who? Tessa looked at the screen again. The request was submitted from a Meridian administrative terminal. Lena frowned. That terminal belongs to Nathan's department. Marcus remained still. What time? 42 a.m. Where was Nathan? Lena checked another system. According to his calendar at home, Marcus looked at the screen. The records are not location records. Lena nodded. I know. That was the difference between a clue and an answer, Tessa continued. But there is something unusual. She opened another file. The request was approved before it was submitted. Robert looked confused. That's impossible. No, Tessa said. It's unusual, not impossible. She pointed at the timestamps. An approval token was created at 5:39. The request was entered at 5:42. Daniel frowned. Someone approved something that did not exist yet? Marcus looked at the screen. No. He understood. They created the approval first. Everyone looked at him. Marcus continued. Then they built the request around the approval. The difference was subtle, but important. Someone had not reacted to an emergency. Someone had prepared a path for one. Lena's face changed on the screen. Marcus. He looked at her. There's something else. What? Nathan's department was preparing a board presentation this morning. About what? A pause. Leadership transition. The room held the information without rushing to interpret it. Marcus leaned back. Ethan had worked beside him. He knew how Marcus built Meridian. He knew the company was not just software and contracts. It was reputation, trust. People believing that the systems beneath them were designed responsibly. If Nathan wanted a leadership transition, there were legitimate ways to pursue it. Board discussions, performance reviews, strategic disagreements. Not a fabricated security chain. But Marcus still needed proof, not a feeling, not betrayal. Proof. Tessa opened the final document attached to the access record. A draft communication plan, prepared but never sent. Robert read the first line. His expression changed. The plan was not about a system failure. It was about a temporary executive suspension, and the person named for replacement authority was Nathan Cole. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff. Then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold. Part 8. The draft communication plan remained on the screen. Nobody touched it. Nobody needed to. The words were already doing what they were designed to do. They created a version of reality. According to the document, Marcus Whitfield had experienced a temporary executive access interruption following a security-related operational concern. Meridian would reassure partners that continuity measures were already in place. There was no mention of a false identity match, no mention of the airport hold. No mention that the concern had started with a passenger who happened to be the company's own CEO. Lena Brooks stared at the document through the video call. Marcus, this was never approved by the board. Edward Hale looked at her. You're certain? Yes. Her voice became sharper. Any executive transition plan involving the CEO requires governance review. Ethan knows that. Marcus looked at the document again. That was the part that bothered him most. Not that Nathan wanted his position. People wanted power every day. That was not unusual. The problem was the method. Someone had built a crisis first, then designed the explanation afterward. Where is Nathan now? Marcus asked. Lena checked. His office. Has he contacted anyone? Not since the emergency review began. Marcus nodded. That detail mattered. Someone who believed a real emergency was happening would usually be trying to understand it. Someone who already knew the outcome might be waiting. Robert closed the folder. We need to contact him. Marcus looked at him. Not yet. Robert frowned. You think we should wait? I think we need to protect the evidence before we confront the person who may have created it, everybody argued. Because the request was no longer about suspicion. It was about preserving facts. Tessa began making copies of the relevant records under compliance supervision. Access logs, the approval timestamps, the emergency review request, the communication draft. Not everything, only what was connected. Pierce noticed. Good. Tessa looked up. What? You're not collecting everything because it exists. Collecting what proves the sequence. She nodded. That was something many organizations forgot. More information did not always mean more truth. Sometimes it only created more noise. A knock came at the conference room door. A man in a Meridian security badge stood outside. Mr. Whitfield. Marcus recognized him. Elliot Graves, head of corporate protection. Another person he knew. Another person who looked uncomfortable. Can I come in? Hubert opened the door. Elliot entered carrying a sealed envelope. I was instructed to deliver this directly. Marcus looked at it. By whom? Elliot hesitated. Nathan Cole. The room changed, not dramatically. Nobody stood. Everybody raised their voice. But everyone understood the importance of the moment. Marcus took the envelope. He did not open it immediately. Did Nathan tell you what was inside? No. Did he tell you why it needed to be delivered personally? Elliot looked down. He said it was a precaution. Marcus almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because that word had appeared too many times that morning. Precaution, a word that could protect people, or hide behind uncertainty. Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a printed authorization document, a temporary transfer of operational decision authority, signed digitally, using Marcus Whitfield's executive credentials. But the signature timestamp was impossible. The authorization had been created at 5:37 a.m., before Marcus arrived at the airport, before the security review, before the flight holds, before anyone publicly knew there was a problem. Lena looked at the document. Marcus! He held up his hand, not to stop her. To slow the moment down, because this was the first piece of information that connected the entire sequence. The airport stop, the emergency review, the 200 flight holds, executive transition plan. They were not separate incidents. They were one chain. But one question remained. Who had actually used his credentials? Aiden Elliot spoke. I should tell you something else. Marcus looked at him. What? Elliot swallowed. Ethan wasn't the only person with access. The room went still. There were 3 people authorized to create executive continuity documents. Marcus looked at the names listed beneath the access permissions. One belonged to Nathan. One belonged to Lena. And the third name belonged to someone Marcus had never expected to see. A person who had been defending him all morning. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff. Then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold Part 9. The third name on the authorization list belonged to Daniel Voss. For a moment, nobody spoke. The security officer who had stopped Marcus at Gate 42. The man who had followed the alert. The man who had insisted he was only doing his job. Daniel looked at the screen, then he shook his head. No. It was the first time Marcus had heard uncertainty break through his voice. I did not create that. Robert Hale turned toward him. Your credentials were listed. I know what they say. Daniel stepped closer to the table. But I never accessed Meridian systems. Tessa checked the record. Daniel's airport account appears as an approved external reviewer. Because I reviewed the passenger alert, Daniel said. Marcus studied him. Did you approve executive continuity authority? No. The answer came quickly. Too quickly to be rehearsed. Marcus believed him. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to keep asking the right questions. Show me the access path, Marcus said. Tessa opened the record. The authorization trail expanded across the screen. 3 names, 3 permissions. Document. But the sequence was wrong. Daniel had not created the authorization. He had been attached to it afterward. Marcus pointed. There. Robert leaned closer. What? The approval was added after the document existed. Tessa nodded. See it? Daniel looked confused. So my name was used as validation. Exactly, Marcus said. The room became quiet again. Not because the mystery was solved, because the shape of it had changed. Someone had not stolen one person's access. Someone had built a process that could make multiple people appear responsible. That was more dangerous. A single bad actor could be removed. A broken system could keep producing the same result. Lena looked at Marcus. Then Nathan may not be the only person involved. Marcus nodded. I know. And Daniel? Marcus looked at the security officer. Daniel stood differently now. Not like someone defending a decision. Someone realizing he had been placed inside one. What happened after you stopped me? Marcus asked. Daniel answered slowly. I submitted the secondary review. Did anything else? Did anyone contact you? Daniel hesitated. One person. A Meridian employee. The room tightened. Name? Daniel looked uncomfortable. He didn't know who they were at the time. But now, he pulled out his phone. I saved the number. A small decision. A useful one. Daniel had not known what he was preserving. He had simply kept something that felt wrong. The number belonged to a contractor connected to Meridian's risk management department. Tessa searched the internal directory. Result appeared. Caleb Ross. Marcus recognized the name. Not a close colleague, not an executive team, but someone who had spent the last year managing internal compliance reviews. Why would compliance be involved? Robert asked. Marcus looked at the documents spread across the table. Because someone wanted this to look legitimate. It sat there, legitimate. That had been the goal, not simply removing him. Creating a record that explained why removing him was necessary. That was what made the morning different from a personal conflict. This was not someone losing control, it was someone building control. An hour later, the first update reached the public. Calder International announced that the flight holds were being released. The aircraft were safe. The navigation systems were operating normally. The emergency review had been triggered by an administrative security escalation that was now under formal investigation. No names were released, no accusations were made. But inside the conference room, the truth was becoming clearer. Marcus Whitfield had not been stopped because he was dangerous. He had been stopped because someone needed the world to believe he was. The investigation continued for another 2 days. Nathan Cole was placed on administrative leave pending review. Caleb Ross was removed from the approval chain. Daniel Voss remained on duty, but he requested additional training review for how behavioral screening alerts were interpreted. And Marcus, he faced the decision he had been avoiding since the beginning, whether to make this a personal fight, or whether to expose the system that allowed it to happen. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. Marcus knew the outcome would not come from a dramatic speech. It would come from documents, timelines, people willing to tell the truth, and a company forced to answer a question it had spent years avoiding. Not whether one person made a mistake, but whether the organization had built a way for mistakes to become acceptable. Security threatened a black CEO before takeoff, then 200 flights were suddenly put on hold. Part 10, the board meeting began at 8 a.m. Marcus Whitfield arrived 10 minutes early, not because he was nervous, because he wanted to remember what the room looked like before everyone started speaking. Meridian's headquarters had been designed to feel open, glass walls, conference rooms, a large model aircraft suspended above the lobby. Marcus had approved the design years earlier because he believed companies should not hide how they operated. That belief had been tested. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was different from the airport. Waiting. No announcements overhead, no public pressure, just documents, the kind of evidence that could not be dismissed as a misunderstanding. The board chair, Evelyn Carter, opened the meeting. Before we discuss consequences, we need to establish the facts. Marcus appreciated the wording. Not blame, not reputation management. Facts. The independent review had confirmed the timeline. At 5:37 a.m., an unauthorized executive continuity document was created using improperly obtained credentials. At 5:39 a.m., an approval token was generated. At 5:42 a.m., a manual security review request was submitted through Meridian's Executive Protection Channel. At 6:18 a.m., Marcus Whitfield was stopped before boarding his flight. The request relied on a false identity association and caused an airport security escalation. The resulting operational review temporarily affected 200 flights. The aircraft systems were never compromised. The threat was never confirmed. The disruption came from a chain of human decisions. The room stayed quiet as the findings were read. Then Evelyn asked the question everyone had avoided. Who is responsible? The investigation identified Nathan Cole and Caleb Ross as the primary actors. Nathan had attempted to create an emergency leadership scenario that would temporarily limit Marcus's authority and position him as the safer operational choice during a manufactured crisis. Caleb had used compliance access to make the sequence appear legitimate. But the review also found something more uncomfortable. The system allowed them to do it. Multiple approvals had existed without sufficient separation of duties. Emergency access pathways had been designed for speed but lacked enough independent verification, and behavioral screening alerts at Calder International had relied too heavily on human interpretation without requiring documented justification before escalation. The problem was not one person. One person had exploited it. Others had failed to question it. Marcus listened as the recommendations were presented: immediate termination for Nathan and Caleb after final employment review, a full audit of executive access controls, a redesign of emergency authority procedures, a new verification requirement for security escalations involving external partners, additional training for employees handling behavioral screening alerts, and a protection policy for workers who reported concerns during operational incidents. The changes were real, but they did not erase what happened. Marcus understood that a system could be repaired. A person still had to live with what it felt like to be stopped in public and treated as a possibility instead of a person. After the meeting ended, Daniel Voss approached him. He looked different than he had at Gate 42. Not confident, defensive, just honest. "I owe you an apology." Marcus looked at him. "For what?" "Accepting the alert before asking why it existed." Marcus considered his answer. "That's the part you can change." Daniel nodded. "I've already started." He explained that he had requested a review of how security officers handled automated alerts, not because he wanted to punish anyone, because he wanted future officers to understand that a system could identify a concern without identifying the truth. Marcus respected that. Growth did not always look like a dramatic confession. Sometimes it looked like someone changing the next decision they made. 3 months later, Marcus returned to Calder International, not for a flight, for a safety review. The same gate where he had been stopped looked almost identical. The same tile floor, the same boarding screens, the same announcements moving through the terminal. But one thing had changed. A small plaque near the operations office marked the beginning of a new review standard created after the incident. Not Marcus's name, not a monument, just a reminder of a process that mattered to him. The goal had never been to prove that he was powerful. The goal was to build a system that worked even when nobody powerful was standing there. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table and opened the old leather notebook he carried everywhere. Inside the back cover was the same sketch he had drawn years ago. Thousands of parts, one system. One failure point, one opportunity to improve. His phone buzzed, a message from Lena. "You saw the new report?" Marcus opened the attachment. It was not about Meridian. It was from a regional aviation partner asking for help reviewing another safety process. A different company, a different system, a different problem. Marcus looked at the request for several seconds. The airport incident was over. The investigation was complete. The question that started that morning had been answered. He was not a threat. He never had been. But the world around him still contained systems that needed better questions. Marcus closed the notebook. Then he wrote one line beneath the old drawing. "Check the signal before you blame the machine." And this time, he knew exactly what he would do next.